Dr. Valeriano, we're so thankful that you're here with us today to share some insight on the topic of brand name versus generic medication.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just advance the slide. Just a medical disclaimer. So just to stay for this for 1 second. So the idea is basically we're going to give you the story about generics versus brand names. But if you look at bullet 2, this is not a substitute for professional care, meaning I'm not going to try to, this is individualized with you and your healthcare provider, your neurologist. So what I'm going to tell you again is in kind of broad strokes, and some of this may apply to you individually, some may not. But anything that you're going to do based on this, make sure obviously you would talk to your healthcare provider. This is not a substitute for the person, that he or she that takes care of you, just so you're aware of that. So go ahead, next slide. So what we're going to talk about is definition of brand name medicines versus generic medications, about prescribing generic medications, about prescribing brand name medications, tips for talking to your doctor, and then final tips and takeaways. So brand name medication is the original drug that was developed and marketed by the pharmaceutical company, by the drug company. This must be approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, so the FDA, after demonstrating safety and effectiveness through a series of studies. We'll get to that, I think, in the next slide. This is protected. If you could just go back 1 second, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is yeah, I think we're 2 slides back. One more. There we go. So this is protected by patents and exclusivities for a certain amount of time. Most cases 5 years. I think in many cases it can be longer, up to 7 years, but can be longer for medications for a disease or continued or conditions that affect fewer than 200,000 people in the United States. Okay. So this is to go over. So when these medications are going to be brought to market, if you look at the far right where it says FDA post-marketing, there's a sort of a long and arduous road to bring these medications to market. And just keep in mind, so what is getting developed and what is getting approved as you go through this is it's a pharmaceutical company's drug, but what's getting approved is actually the molecule. In other words, if this is a medicine like lacosamide, which is the brand name is Vimpat, but so what they're looking at is lacosamide. Eventually, if that gets approved, and the company that UCB is the company, it'll come out as Vimpat, but it doesn't mean that Vimpat's the only thing that works. It just means Vimpat is the brand name lacosamide, but the medication that's being vetted, it's being looked at here, the molecule is really the lacosamide. And we'll sort of tie that in with the area of generic drugs. So in the beginning, there's just discovery and development of the drug. Preclinical research is a lot of times just animal research, where these get to be very long studies and takes a long time to bring the drugs to market, is when the clinical research comes. And these are usually what are called phase 3 studies. So in phase 3 studies, these are clinical, they're randomized controlled trials that usually are double blinded. In other words, the people will volunteer for these studies. Usually we're talking about epilepsy here. So people that get in drug studies usually are people that have difficult to control epilepsy, multiple seizures, even on the medicines they're on. They will get in one of these studies, and usually there's a baseline where they count your seizures on the medicines you're on now. Then the new medicine, the quote experimental medicine and or a placebo is added. And then they compare your seizures over a certain amount of time, usually 12 weeks, versus the 8 weeks that they counted in the beginning for your baseline seizure frequency. It takes many people, many patients to actually show a statistical difference that these medications work. So these are very expensive trials, and they take a long time to get a drug approved. I'm not making an excuse for what brand name drugs cost, but this is where a lot of the cost is. These studies are very expensive to do. They're done usually at multiple sites across the United States, multiple universities, and also sometimes worldwide. So this is, like I said, a long process, takes several years to finally get a drug to market like that. So the drug has to show effectiveness versus placebo. It has to meet a certain statistical level for the FDA. So if you look at sort of the light blue, the 4th bullet over from the left, for the FDA to review it. So the FDA then will approve it based on how efficacious the drug is, how effective the drug is. And then after that, then the FDA also has post-marketing safety monitoring, obviously, where anything that happens to the drug, any kind of side effects, adverse events, that will need to be reported so that you can monitor the safety of the drug. It's hard to give you a number how many people are in the studies for the drug. It'll be usually several thousand people in a study. But then obviously once the drug comes to market, many more thousand people are put on. So there is a monitoring to make sure that once the drug is exposed to multiple people, many more people, that there's nothing untoward that happens. So as you can see on the bottom, it says the process to discover and develop new drugs and bring them to market takes many years and is very costly for the pharmaceutical company. Okay. So there's the drugs are on patent. And usually, like I said, the patent can be 5 years, it can be 7 years, it could be 9 years. It depends on some various conditions, and also if there's different ways the drug can be given, if it's given only orally, if it's given IV, etc. So once the patent exclusivity ends, companies can apply to create a generic medication. So a generic medication is the same as the brand name in dosage form, safety, strength, effectiveness, and intended use. To be approved by the FDA, it must demonstrate bioequivalence. That is, it works the same way and provides the same clinical benefit. Approved generics are safe, effective, and interchangeable with their brand name counterparts. So let me go back to the first sentence here. So now what happens is X amount of time has gone by. You now have the patent on the drug. So the exclusive use of the drug by the original pharmaceutical company has ended, and other companies can now apply for generic medications. Or actually for a generic version of this medication. So if you look for the third bullet, it said to be approved by the FDA, it must demonstrate bioequivalence, that it works the same way and provides the same clinical benefits. So what happens is when the generic medication comes out, or to get it out, they don't have to go back and prove that the drug, that this molecule, let's again, just as an example, we're going to use the drug lacosamide, which the brand name was Vimpat. So now Vimpat actually is the generic. There's generic lacosamide. Excuse me. So now let's say that the patent is run out on Vimpat. So now other drug companies now are applying for generic lacosamide to come out. They don't have to go back and do studies to show that lacosamide works. The idea was that the original studies, because that would really slow up any kind of ability to get generics. They'd have to go through the whole studies again. So they don't have to show that lacosamide is effective in patients, because that's already been shown, or the Vimpat, the drug, the brand name drug, would not have been approved. What they have to demonstrate is bioequivalence, which means that the generic medicine that they give, the generic lacosamide, when people take it, they achieve levels that are very similar, very equal to the medicines when people take the brand name Vimpat. So in other words, the idea is when you take a generic lacosamide, as opposed to taking the brand name Vimpat, the amount of the molecule, the amount of lacosamide in your system needs to be the same between the two, because the efficacy, the drug was proven to work as it got worked up as lacosamide, and then became Vimpat, became the brand name. The new generic is again going to be called lacosamide. So as long as you can show that the generic pill, when it dissolves in your system, will give you the same level of lacosamide in your system as the Vimpat did, that's called bioequivalence. So they don't have to go through studies to prove the drug works. The idea is it's already been proven the drug works, but it was proven that the drug works at certain levels that were attained with the Vimpat, with the brand name. The generics, the burden on the generics is to prove that their generic pills, when taken, allow you to have the same levels in your system of that medication, in this case, let's say lacosamide, as when you use the brand name. So theoretically, if you look at the fourth bullet, so approved generics are safe, effective, and interchangeable with their brand name counterparts. So the idea is it's the same molecule. This is not a different drug. Lacosamide's lacosamide, whether it's called Vimpat as a brand name or whether one of the generic lacosamide, as long as the amount of lacosamide in your system is the same, it should be just as effective regardless of what name is on the pill or what the pill looks like. So I'm going to sort of touch on some of these things as we go along. Let me just see one thing. Just go back one more slide with the slide we were on. So the other thing to remember is the generics are allowed to have a slightly different amount of medication in them than the brand names. The amount of let's say again, we'll use lacosamide. The amount of lacosamide is just a name. There's a generic company in West Virginia close to here, Mylan Labs, that supplies a lot of generics to the Pittsburgh area. So if you use the Mylan Labs generic lacosamide, that may have a slightly different amount of lacosamide. And I'm saying a slightly different amount of lacosamide than the brand name Vimpat has in it. But the same way every Vimpat tablet will have the same amount of lacosamide in it, the generics are the same. In other words, if you use a Mylan Lab generic medication, each Mylan Lab lacosamide generic pill will have the same amount of lacosamide in as the other Mylan pill. So in other words, if you're on a generic and you're controlled with that generic, it's the same as if you're on a brand name and controlled with that. In other words, you're not going to change the dose, the levels are not going to change when you go to the next month's generic if you're still getting Mylan Labs. So there's quality control over the generics, meaning each generic pill has to have the same amount of medicine as all the other generics that company produces. The same way as if you're on Vimpat, if you're on a brand name, the Vimpat has to have exactly the same amount of lacosamide in it, pill to pill. So that's one of the ways we know the generics are safe and effective, because again, it pill to pill in that generic, the amount of medicine will not vary, okay? So how different are generic medications? So the cost can be significantly different. One thing that happens sometimes, so just to read this, tend to cost significantly less than counterparts because they do not have repeat costly studies that require the brand name, and multiple manufacturers create competition. So like I said, the generics don't have to prove that that molecule is effective. That's already been proven by the brand name getting approved. What the generics have to prove is that when you take that pill, you get the same amount of medication in your system as if you took the brand name. One thing I would mention here, just because sometimes it can be a little confusing to patients, is sometimes when a generic first comes out, the price may not come down that much initially. Sometimes there may be only one or two companies that come to market quickly with a generic. So sometimes the cost may not be a huge difference from the brand name initially. But as more companies become involved and more companies manufacture the generic medication, it's like anything with competition, supply and demand, the price will come down. Just to give you an idea, I don't know what the number is right now, but I know at one point with lamotrigine, there were 17 different generics of lamotrigine. Lamictal was the brand name. So once you get that, these prices are going to change. So over a fairly short period of time, there'll be a significant cost savings with the generic versus the brand name. The appearance, the trademark laws prevent the generic from looking identical to the brand name, though the FDA does encourage similar size and shape. So again, this is years ago. I don't know if this was just state, if this was just in Pennsylvania, or if this was national, but in Pennsylvania, and this is not true anymore, when you got a generic medication, you could actually get two different generics in the same prescription. So people would actually sometimes get a bottle of pills that would have two different generics. They would look different. You can't do that anymore. So your generic medication each pill should look the same as the same generic medication. And again, each one of those pills of that generic producer will have exactly the same amount of the parent compound in it as the next one. Ingredients, generic medications may have different inactive ingredients. This happens where there may be how the pill itself is made. So the molecule is going to be the same. The actual the business end, the medicines that's effective is going to be the same. Every once in a while, there may be a different dye. There may be something in the pill that's a little different in the way the pill's made. And so occasionally you see people who this isn't common. Occasionally you see people who may be allergic to the generic medication who were not allergic to the prescription medication. They're not actually allergic to the like I said, let's say lacosamide. They may have some allergic response to something in how the pill's made. In other words, if you want to call it the filler or however the pill is put together, that's very uncommon. You can't be not allergic to lacosamide and you're allergic to generic lacosamide. You can be allergic to other things in the pill, but I don't want to give you the idea that's a common thing. That's very uncommon, okay? So generic, as we just talked about, generic medications have the same active ingredient, safety, quality, and effectiveness. The medications are generally less expensive for both the patient and insurance companies. The numbers, I mean, you can say 80 to 85%. I mean, it may be more than that. It may be a little less than that. Most insurance companies only cover generics when available unless you go through appeals process. So what happens is once generics come out, if a brand name is the only drug available, so a drug like Fycompa, perampanel, let's say, is the generic, but the brand name is Fycompa, there is no generic perampanel. So if you prescribe Fycompa, that's what the people are going to get. But just going back to the example we were using, if you're not on a medicine, a lacosamide, you prescribe Vimpat, which is the brand name, the likelihood is extremely high. The insurance company will not cover that. They will say you have to go to the generic lacosamide, which is much cheaper for them and is actually cheaper for you. So if there is a generic available for the brand name, then almost always the insurance company will mandate that you have to take that. There is an appeals process, and I think as we go on, we can get to that. So next slide. And we'll talk about that here. So there's a narrow therapeutic index for the medications where small differences matter. So patient history, tolerability, allergic reactions, past failure on generic medications. And so let me just talk about this for a minute. So if you're somebody, talk about two different people. So somebody has had trouble getting the seizures under control. You've tried multiple medications. Sometimes small changes in medication may make a difference where your seizures break through. Now you've hit sort of a sweet spot where your seizures are well controlled on a certain regimen that you're on. That includes, especially if this would include a new medication, because the newer medications will be brand names. So that you now want a medication that has a brand name and is working, and now that medication has become generic. In people that, if that's where the appeals process may come in. So if you have somebody where you are difficult to control seizure-wise, it took a lot of fine tuning, a lot of ups and downs to get control. My feeling is if you don't have to rock the boat, don't rock it. So like I just said, even though there's every reason to believe in most people, the generics are going to be fine. And that is true. So I don't want to contradict what I said before, but I'm just saying if it's really something where this is the only thing that's worked for you, and it's possible to stay on the brand name, what's one of the reasons, one of the conditions where you may be really reasonable to try to get the brand name through the appeals process. Where the other side of the coin is this, and I was telling the people and before we joined here. So I have people who years ago, a lot of the physicians, a lot of the neurologists told patients that they should never take a generic, that they have to be on a brand name medicine. So I have people, for instance, I can think of one person who's on the brand name Tegretol on a low dose. I was going to say 600 milligrams a day. Tegretol doses usually go from 600 to 1200. And they've been seizure free now for over 20 years. And so they, said, well, you want to try the generic, because I think for the brand name, they're paying, I don't know, $300 a month for the brand name. The generic would cost them, again, 80% less, but they're afraid to go to the generic because this has, quote, worked for 20 years. It may be that they don't need the medicine at all, but that's a different issue. But the point being, if you're somebody that's extremely well controlled for a long period of time, you're not somebody where a small change may make a difference. I mean, that's somebody where really the likelihood is you can easily go over to a generic. Now, one thing also, there is anxiety in people when they go from a brand name to a generic. Some people accept it better than others. But one thing you can do, and one thing I tell people is, or that we do, so let's say now, sometimes it happens when you change insurance companies. So now you're on X medicine, you're doing good, it's a brand name. Now your new insurance doesn't want to pay for that. So they want you to pay, they want to pay for the generic. So one of the things we can do is we said, look, the brand name works. While you're on this brand name medicine, it has worked, it's been effective. So we're going to get a drug level, a serum drug level on the brand name medicine to see what amount of this medicine, what concentration of this medicine in your system is effective. Then if you have to go to the generic, once you do, after you sort of get a steady state level of the generic in your system, we'll recheck the level. We'll make sure that on the generic medication, your level is the same as it was on the brand name medication. And again, if you remember earlier, you're going back to one of the earlier slides, it's the idea of bioequivalence. As long the medicine itself has been proven what works. So as long as the medicine level is the same on the generic as it is on the brand name, there's no reason it wouldn't be equally effective. So one of the things you can do to allay people's anxieties is to get levels when they're on the brand name, and then after they've made the switch, then you can get levels when they've made the switch to the generic medication to reassure them that they're absorbing the medicine, they're getting the same level. And as long as that level worked when they were on the brand name medicine, there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't work when they're on the generic medication. So that's one thing you can do if the patients are worried about it. And again, I think the more that people are well controlled, and it's kind of, you didn't have to go through 5 or 10 different medicines to get control. There really is almost no reason in general not to go to a generic medication. I mean, again, it's the same medication, it's the same molecule. Here it says insurance requirements, step therapy, try and fail, less expensive generic medications. The other thing that'll happen sometimes in the sort of, again, prior authorization is that because I see a lot of people with refractory seizures, seizures that are difficult to control. So sometimes what can happen is I'll prescribe a new medication that there's no generic, just again, Ficomp, I'll use as an example. So the insurance company will say, no, that's too expensive. But they have to try these other generic medications. Now, sometimes, and this is where your doctor may be helpful to you. So sometimes they'll send a list of, it's not that anything wrong with generic medications, but they'll send a list of medications, some of which are very similar to medications that have not worked. Not because they're generic medications, the medicines did not work. Sometimes with the prior authorization, that's where the doctor may help you and say, look, the brand, it's not that I want a brand name medicine, it's that this medicine's a new medicine. The older medicines haven't worked, and some of the generics we're talking about are very similar, even though they didn't take that particular medicine. It's very similar to medicines that didn't work. And so that's why we want to try the new medicine. In other words, sometimes the doctor can help you get the medicine you want, but in general, as I'm saying, if it's just a question of that you're doing very well, you've done well for years, you're just worried about going to a generic medicine rather than a brand name, and you've been seizure free for 10 years or something like that, the insurance company's usually not going to take that as a reason, and there's probably not a big reason to make that switch. And like I said, if you're worried, you can check the levels of the brand name versus the generic. Okay, next. Okay, so if you have any concerns about your medicine, you should contact your doctor. And the point I was making is this is not substituting for talking to your physician. You really do want to go over with them, he or she, what they want to do and why. And so here's some questions you can ask as the generic. So let's say you have really just always gotten the brand name, it's very expensive. And these drugs, as you know better than I do, the drug prices go up. And so is there now that it's getting more expensive, I just don't want to keep paying this much. Is there a generic available for this medication? Would the physician have any trouble with you going to the generic medicine? Now, sometimes, as I said, there may be reasons to stay on the brand name if you were very difficult to get under control, multiple medicines were tried, small changes sometimes made a difference. But in general, most of the time, the majority of the time, the generic will be absolutely acceptable. So is the brand name drug medically necessary for me or my child? Again, if there's a generic, the answer is probably you don't need the brand name. It probably is not necessary. What side effects should I look for if we switch from the brand name to the generic? One thing I don't tell people by and large is I don't like to sort of outline side effects too much, because it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell people what to watch for, it tends to happen a little more often. Like I said, this is going to be the same medicine. There can be a slight change in the amount of that medicine that's in the pill. It's very minimal, but again, it may be a little bit different. So what I just tell people, and this is true when I use any medicine, whether it's generic, if there's some real big thing about a medicine in the beginning and say, look, this is really something that's a very common side effect, look for this. But otherwise, what I tell people is if something seems different to you, when you switch from, this medicine to that medicine or the brand name to generic, if something does not seem the way you're more tired, whatever, if there's something you think has happened that you don't like when you've made this switch, then let me know. The other reason I do that is because sometimes if you outline things and say these are the things to watch for, and it's not something you outlined and something else happens, the patient may not think that that's from the medicine. So I keep it open-ended. Just is there something you don't like when you switch from the medicine rather than outline things? And I think that way the patient, if there's anything that's bothering them about the switch, whether it's medicine to medicine or brand name to generic, then they would get a hold of me. Okay? So key takeaways that we spoke about: generic medications are safe and effective. That's absolutely true. Individual medical circumstances may guide the choice of brand versus generic medication. Again, I think we spoke about that. If you have any questions or concerns about your medicine, again, make sure you speak to your physician. And do this, obviously, you're going to do this in conjunction with the physician. And it's important that if you do switch, the same way if you switch a medicine to another medicine, the same brand to generic, it's something you have to be comfortable with. And if you're uncomfortable with it, then you need to bring up to the physician why you're uncomfortable with it, and then hear their point as to whether they think it's a good idea or not. So I think at the end, there's probably going to be questions and answers. And so I think next up, I think Dr. Crouch is going to give a pharmacist perspective along with tips to talking to your pharmacist and insurance company. Thank you.
Absolutely. And while Jackie gets ready, I will graciously introduce Dr. Crouch for you. She has been a licensed pharmacist at Valley Children's Hospital for over 13 years. and has history also working in an outpatient pharmacy. So coming from where all of our parents may have questions, she has been on the other end of receiving those questions. She is a director of our clinical pharmacy team at Valley Children's Hospital, as well as works with our ambulatory pharmacist, our technicians. She works in our medication and reconciliation program, oversees our residency program. So she is an amazing asset to our team, and we are happy to have her here today. So Dr. Crouch, please take it away. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for having me. I was counting the number of lamotrigine generic formulations on the market after Dr. Valeriano said that. I counted 16 different manufacturers. So he said 17. He was pretty spot on. So I want to give him kudos for knowing that. So I'm going to talk through a couple of things related to pharmacy in general and what you can expect if you're really to brand generics as you enter the retail space of pharmacy, and hopefully give you a few tools to be successful in that space and approach it with the least amount of frustration. As we know, the retail pharmacy is often the last stop in the healthcare process, and it can be very frustrating at times for both patients and the retail pharmacy staff when they run into struggles with insurance and making sure that they can get the medication to you. So the first couple things I want to talk about are just some retail pharmacy insights and what pharmacists can and can't do in that space. So as pharmacists, one of our key roles is really navigating that substitution process and practices. We do follow state laws and insurance rules for generic substitution. When making that decision, whether or not a generic can be substituted for a brand name medication. It isn't always straightforward, I will preface with that. And some states require a patient or prescriber consent, and insurance formularies can definitely vary widely, whether we have government payers, with TRICARE or Medicaid, and then also commercial payers. So each patient is a unique challenge in identifying what insurance will pay for their specific medications, and all of the formularies are different. Inventory is another challenge. Not every pharmacy stocks every medication, whether it's brand or generic. And if a patient needs something that we don't necessarily have in the store, the pharmacists are great. Pharmacy technicians are great at working to find alternatives or source it from another location. So if you're looking for something specific that you know your insurance will pay for, that a pharmacist is a great resource in doing that. I will also share that specific, because I know in the neurology space, there are a lot of controlled substance products that are available for therapy. And we are facing unique challenges in the pharmacy space related to the Drug Enforcement Agency placing total production restrictions on certain controlled substances or all controlled substances. And so as we move through the year, those allocations start to dwindle, and we have been starting to notice that we have an uptick in drug shortages in the later parts of the year, and we are correlating that to these newer restrictions that the DEA is placing on drug production or import production of the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So you might see that in things like lorazepam or your cannabidiols, things like that in the neurology space. So the latter part of the year has been proving to be a little bit more challenging over the last few years for that reason. And the next thing that pharmacists are great at doing is the counseling aspect. It really is an essential component. So if you're checking out at the pharmacy counter and they in some states, the law is that with first dispense, they have to counsel and give you the information that you need specific to that medication. But on repeat dispenses, that is not required, but they'll often offer counseling should you have any additional questions. One of the key things in this space is that generics, as Dr. Valeriano mentioned, definitely look different due to those trademark laws, and inactive ingredients can vary. And I agree with Dr. Valeriano in that oftentimes it's very rare that the inactive ingredients will trigger allergies or things like that, but there are those instances, and so making sure that we're sharing that with you all. We definitely try to help patients understand those differences so you feel confident in your treatment. So next slide, please. So tips for talking with your pharmacist. I wholly encourage to ask if a generic is available. It might work the same and cost less. And I've been a pharmacist for 13 years. Actually, I've been here 13 years, so 14 years. And I've worked in pharmacy since 2004. So I've been in this area 21 years, in this space 21 years. And I started in retail as a pharmacy technician. And so that is something that I will say that I've seen over time, and as I've advanced in my career, is that things change over time, and you know, I have seen a more acceptance of generics as I've progressed in my career, because most of the time they do work. And Dr. Valeriano didn't get into the specifics, but the FDA requires that in their bioequivalence testing that the drug companies and manufacturers prove that they are within 80 to 125% of the active ingredient in the product. And when that is tested either in vivo or in vitro, which means in the body or outside the body, that there is no clinical significant difference between that. So the effect is the same, whether you're getting the brand or generic. So I always encourage everybody to ask, is there a generic available for this? Because it could ultimately save you money overall. It is important to share allergies or sensitivities to certain things. So some generics obviously have those different inactive ingredients, as mentioned earlier. And so sharing that information with your pharmacist is very helpful in doing that digging and deep dive as to, oh, this may have something that you have mentioned you have a sensitivity to. Dyes are a big one on that we see here in the hospital that we will often run into with different product formulations. I would expect changes in appearance. I think that's a fair assessment. Is changes are to be expected. Appearance is expected to look different from manufacturer to manufacturer, but just know that by law and through the FDA's regulation, they will still work the same, or they should still work the same. Second. Apologize on the overhead page there. And lastly, I would say ask for help finding your medication. So if you've asked, or if you have a prescription for something and you end up on a product that works well, we can help you to locate or suggest alternatives to the medication if it's not in stock at the store. From retail chain to retail chain, we can transfer medications, do things like that to help you find that medication in stock somewhere else. Next slide. So for insurance costs or insurance and cost considerations, formulary navigation is something that is a challenge. As I mentioned, you do have different formularies for different drug plans. And so it's often the deciding factor on whether a patient receives a brand or generic medication. Pharmacists can help navigate the tiered formulary aspect of things. And so within the medication formulary, there are different tiers, and with certain tiers being more preferred. Tier 1 drug is the preferred drug. And then it advances from there, tier 2, tier 3. And they categorize those tiers by cost and coverage levels. So you may be prescribed a tier 2 drug, and what they may require you to do is what they call step therapy, and want you to try the tier 1 drug first before moving on to the tier 2 drug. So that's where you get the prior authorization process that comes into play. So if a medication is not covered, the pharmacy staff will communicate with the provider and help support the medication need through documentation of clinical notes. And so the pharmacy often will reach back out to the provider and say, hey, this medication requires a prior authorization, and this is what they're asking for, or the information will be passed back to the doctor to fill out forms that are required by the insurance company to establish that a certain therapy is clinically appropriate and required for that patient. Oftentimes those prior authorizations are approved. Many times they are not. And so if they are not, you move into an appeal process where your provider has to submit additional documentation or have a phone call with the insurance company and what they call a peer-to-peer. Pharmacists also participate in these calls if you have a pharmacist that works with the provider in that space to do the peer-to-peer to support the medication use in that space. The other thing that is available from a cost standpoint are that some manufacturers provide financial assistance through different programs and offer coupons for reducing the cost of that. So they sometimes partner with the insurance and they'll cover the cost of the copay if the copay is in a higher tier, or if you can't get coverage at all, they do have programs to reduce the burden on the consumer. And then the other piece of that is foundation assistance. So different medical foundations within different disease states will often have some assistance to help pay for these more costly, newer costly brand name drugs that don't currently have a generic out on the market. And so I think those are great things to keep in mind as you move forward. So go ahead and advance the slide. So some tips for talking with the insurance company is that you definitely want to check your formulary coverage. You can call the insurance company and ask, is this medication covered and at what tier? And that will give you a great start at what to expect once you hit the pharmacy, and another good conversation starter with the provider when that medication is being prescribed. You can also ask, will this require a prior authorization? Because that will also give you some guidance as to what to expect and how long it may take to actually get the medication. You can ask about the prior authorization process. You can ask the insurance company what documentation is needed if coverage is denied, so that you can be a great advocate for yourself and support even your medical team or the pharmacy in saying this is what they're asking for in order to have this new medication covered. You can ask about copay assistance. Sometimes the manufacturer does offer those coupons or may know of a different foundation support for specific medications that are newer to the market. And then understand the step therapy. You may need to try a generic or even a whole different medication class before a brand is approved. So just know that they have insurance companies have specific requirements within their formulary to drive high clinical value care and to ensure that we are trying the most cost-effective way of managing the different disease states. Go ahead and go next. I know that Dr. Valeriano talked about therapeutic monitoring, but I also want to kind of touch on the pharmacist side of things related to neurotherapeutic index drugs. This, as he mentioned, is just close monitoring for drugs like warfarin, levothyroxine, or in our case, anti-epileptics. And I think something that's really important to call out here, specific for the population that I work most closely with, is that age does matter in these cases. But I really appreciate how Dr. Valeriano approaches equivalence issues and ensuring that we are, when switching from a brand to a generic or even generic to generic, that we are monitoring patients very closely to ensure that their drug levels are adequate and continuing to be at the level that has allowed for control of seizures over time. But pediatrics have a very unique metabolism and how they process drugs, and it varies by age. And so how a neonate or a brand new baby processes a drug is very different than how a school age child processes a drug versus a teenager processing a drug. So that we are very careful in how we approach these different populations with neurotherapeutic index drugs. The other things that are available to patients are things like medication therapy management. There are just different programs that where a patient can meet with a pharmacist to really assess efficacy, safety, and adherence to medications, and work with the provider or many different providers to streamline medication therapy, recommend different lab tests that we could run to help monitor and make sure that we are doing the best for patients in their therapy. And in the newer space, pharmacists also may have collaborative practice agreements. And so if you see a neurologist in a specialty clinic who is managing your care, there may be pharmacists that work with the providers in that space and have collaborative practice agreements where the pharmacist is the one that's doing all the medication therapy monitoring and ordering labs or different tests that ensure that we have adequate management of the medication therapy. So I wanted to share some reliable sources for patients, and you'll often hear people joke about Dr. Google, and there is something to it. And as we enter the age of AI, I think there's a lot of risk in using AI to answer medical questions. Though the different models are getting better and better, we want to make sure that we are looking at the most validated references. In terms of equivalence, the gold standard here is what is called the FDA's Orange Book, and you can access that online, but you'll have to do some reading to understand how to read the charts. But it is a resource that is available, and you can ask the pharmacist at your local pharmacy about the Orange Book rating. What is the Orange Book rating for this drug to the drug that I'm currently taking? And this is the resource that tells us what level of equivalence these different products have as you're switching between product to product, or if you can even consider them equivalent at all. Other reputable drug information websites include Medline Plus, drugs.com, and Daily Med. I'm in Daily Med in my role almost every day, looking at equivalence and as we're onboarding different drugs into our system here. So if I can't find something in Orange Book or something's not clear to me in Orange Book, I often will reference these other websites to help get to the package insert, which will give me additional information to base my assessment. So these are very reputable spaces that you can go read about the drugs that you're taking. And then obviously the pharmacy counter help desk. Pharmacists are accessible at your local pharmacy. I would say maybe a little bit less accessible now than they once were, with Rite Aid closing and all of those scripts going out to other pharmacies. That's put that has impacted other retail pharmacies. And we've seen that several times kind of throughout over the course of my career. And then also many retail chains will offer a toll-free support line. So that is helpful as well. If you can ask your pharmacist at your local retail chain if that's something that's available, or even an independent pharmacy, if you can go there for help, or if they're aware of any other resources where you can go to find help. And then, as I mentioned, in many specialty clinics, there are clinic-based pharmacists, and these pharmacists may, and spell that, they may be an employee of these clinics as part of the medical team. And we have that resource here at Valley Children's, where we have a pharmacist embedded in our specialty clinic that supports all of the medication use process, and sees patients and prescribes different medications, makes medication adjustments based on a collaborative practice agreement that is available to them. And that has also helped with access to the care team. So if you're seeing a specialty clinic, you may have interacted with a pharmacist there. And then lastly, state boards of pharmacy. I think these are often forgotten about resources. They are great for regulatory and safety updates related to different medications, and what is allowed for pharmacists to do at the retail level. Go ahead, next. So just some key takeaways from my point of view. I think that pharmacists really do play a vital role in the substitution decisions, overall inventory management, and patient counseling about generics and brand medications. And so use your resources. The pharmacists are happy to go over the medications, talk about the medications, look for interactions between your different medications, and then help you really navigate this brand generic process. They know that insurance coverage really does drive the access. So when you get to the retail pharmacy and they're telling you, oh, it's not covered, it's not something that the retail pharmacy staff are making that decision. It's really the insurance company that's driving that access. And so with the different formulary tiers, prior authorizations, and that step therapy, it really often determines what you as a patient receive. And there are ways that you can work through that with the pharmacist and your provider to get to what your provider feels that you need to best take care of you. I think communication really is key. Ask questions. I think it's so important that you feel empowered to ask questions about your care of pharmacists, of your providers, of the insurers, because really we're all here to serve you. Ask about substitution laws, about what the inactive ingredients might be between different products, what your coverage might be, and what assistance programs are available to you. And then lastly, I think monitoring really matters. And I, again, want to give kudos to Dr. Valeriano for how he approaches therapeutic monitoring, especially for these neurotherapeutic index drugs in the neurology space, and also in pediatric populations. They really do require very close oversight. And you have options such as medication therapy management programs to help support that. And so next slide, that would be it for me. And these are the references. So as time goes on, these are links to the main websites that I think are very reputable and will offer great information. So thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers. Really appreciate you so much for sharing your expertise and this information. We did have a question in the chat, so if we think we have a few minutes here to address it. She asked, this is from Dina, she asked, due to the current chaos with the FDA, are you expecting a drastic decrease in research with current and upcoming anti-epileptic drugs?
Yeah, the short answer probably would be yes, although a lot of the research really is done by the companies themselves these days. So, I mean, the FDA, there certainly is things with the FDA, some of the more kind of actually bringing drugs to market, more nuts and bolts kind of research is done by the companies because that's their bread and butter. That's how they make money. But the answer is yes, there will be decreased research. I don't know how much it'll affect it may not have quite as much an effect on some of the newer drugs coming out, because most of that still is in industry funded.
I think from the brand generic standpoint, you probably won't see a big change there. That's going to be impacting some of the newer therapies that are available, such as gene therapies and monoclonal antibodies, the more biologic classes of drugs that are really the focus of many new drug development, and that's in the pipeline.
Thank you. And you did each both touch on this in your presentations, but we did also ask, so anything else that you would like to add on this topic about the inactive ingredients that are found in generics that can sometimes cause reactions and or increased side effects? Anything else you would like to add to that subject?
No, I said that, and Dr. Crouch can add. The only thing I've noticed that, again, very, very rarely, there might be something in a certain pill in the generic that has caused an allergic reaction. And again, I've done this a long time, and I don't want to say I can count on one hand, but almost how often that's happened. So it's not a real common thing. It certainly was nothing where I'd say, oh, geez, be really wary. And the idea we're trying to get across is that generics are very good medicines and are very good reasons to take them. And the idea that of a very, very rare allergic reaction shouldn't dissuade anyone.
Yeah, and I think something that we didn't touch on that is very encouraging for me just in general is pharmacogenomics even is a whole new, there's a lot of focus in pharmacogenomics in the pharmacy space, and that's looking at what your genetic makeup is, and how you may respond to a specific drug just based on different receptor expression that you have in your body. And so outside of the inactive ingredient piece, they're looking at your genes and how your genes may interact with certain drugs or how your body may respond to certain drugs. And I think that's a whole another topic, but something that we're very excited about, that is really on the frontier of medicine, where we're able to look at even, very old drugs and say, why is this not working for this patient? And it may be how your genetic makeup in general. So there's more to come and more in this space about how people react to certain medications and why. So it's very exciting to see that space grow.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing today. You'll see on the screen here, we do have a QR code. If you scan that QR code, it will allow you to connect to our website, where we have our member organizations who offer medication assistance programs for anyone who needs maybe some additional resources to be able to acquire your prescribed medications. Please feel free to visit that page and visit the member organizations pages that have programs in place to help with that. And then in addition to that, we just want to say thank you to Catalyst Pharmaceuticals for today's webinar, and want to again say thank you to Dr. Valeriano, Dr. Crouch, Caitlin, Andrea, Epilepsy Association of Western and Central Pennsylvania, and Valley Children's Healthcare. And thank you to all of you who participated in today's event. This has been recorded, and it will be provided as a resource on our website and on our YouTube channel, so that if it can be referred back to if there's ever anything else that you would like to review or to share with anybody else. And on behalf of Epilepsy Alliance America, thank you to everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.